Parents know that reading is a fundamental skill that children need to learn in order to succeed in school and in life. Do you have questions about how to help your child learn to read or how to supplement what they're learning at school? That is exactly what I'll be discussing with today's guest, a longtime educator that has worked as a teacher in a classroom as well as an individual instructor or tutor, helping students on a one-to-one basis. If you have children that are learning to read or are working to increase their reading skill abilities, you're going to want to watch today's show. Welcome to the latest episode of Learning with Success, the show for parents of school-aged children, sponsored by Success Tutoring Online, helping students with academic advancement for over 20 years, and I'm your host, Armando Salcido. Today, we have elementary and middle school instructor, Miss Susan. Miss Susan also happens to be one of the most popular tutors at Success Tutoring Online, helping students with math, reading, and general subjects from kindergarten all the way through middle school and even into high school. So how are you doing, Susan?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. Okay. So you've taught students in public school and then many years later in private school. And now you're mainly working as a tutor, helping students on a one-to-one basis.
Yes.
One of the areas that you help students with is learning how to read. Although most people know that reading is important, why would you say it is one of the most, if not the most important skill that students need to master and learn well?
Well, the thing about reading is it ties into really everything, right? Any hobby, any academic subject. It isn't just school. You can't learn to cook if you can't read. You can't get a driver's license because you can't read, the manual. Even learning games when you're young or being able to read a math problem, for instance. A lot of times parents will come to us and they are frustrated. My kid can't do math. He doesn't know how to do math. He can't add. And when we assess that, well, the truth is a lot of times the child really can add or subtract or do a number pattern or whatever it is. But the problem is that they can't read the directions.
Right.
Or they can't read the word problem. And math these days, even the lower levels, have a tremendous amount of word problems. Well, if they can't read the problem, they can't do the math. It isn't that they don't understand the math. So it really goes across every subject because every subject requires some form of reading, right?
It's like a skill that you use in all areas of life, really.
Every area, every area. I mean, what laundry detergent, right? Okay, can I use this on whites or colors, right? Who knows, right? What kind of things do you use for this? What kind of things do you use for that? I mean, as adults, we just sort of take it for granted. We just pick up the box and read it, right?
Yeah.
But honestly, if you can't read, you can't function in daily life. Not to mention when kids and adults, any age really, when they don't know how to read, they're not confident in life. They're stressed out. They often, and the older they get, Armando, the more they try to hide it and the more stressful it becomes. And they don't do well in social situations because they don't want to be asked the wrong question. What do you think they want to be asked about reading a certain book? And all of a sudden they're like, what are they going to do? Say, I don't know how to read? No.
Right.
So the confidence level is lower. They're more stressed out. I mean, it's just a broad overall thing. It's just important to live life. You need to be able to read things, even simple things.
So I know that some people, and I feel for people that have gone through life and never learned to read. It's incredible,
It's torturous is what it is. It's torture for those people.
Right. Exactly. So
and torture for young kids in school too. because teachers they can get upset. Their parents get upset. So they're struggling to try and fake their way through it or memorize their way through things. And there's a constant nervousness, and it breaks my heart to see that with
Yeah.
kids, because
Yeah.
it isn't that they aren't intelligent. It isn't that they can't do it. It's a skill. And like with any skill, you have to learn the skill and you have to practice the skill. And not every person learns at the same pace either. So that's a tough one, because
Yeah.
schools move at X pace.
Right.
And you either keep up or you don't keep up,
Right.
right?
Right.
And if you're one of those who is just a slower learner, which doesn't make you a non-learner, it doesn't make you dumb. It just means it takes a little longer to grasp for some than others.
Or a different approach.
Or a different approach, right?
Right.
You have to keep in mind that every child is different.
Yeah.
They're going to learn in a different way, like you say, a different technique, or they're going to learn at a different speed. It takes an individual approach, which really is where the parent comes in, because teachers aren't able, in this particular system we have now, they're not going to be able to give the child a lot of individual attention. They really do try. Teachers work really hard.
Oh yeah, they do. They really
But
do.
it's not possible.
Yeah.
It's not possible when you have 36 or 7-year-olds
Right.
to give that 5 or 6, or who even knows, 10, we don't even know how many, the individual attention that each one needs. It's physically impossible.
Right. Now, there's also one thing that I thought of as you were talking, is that it's not just learning to read. There's actually increasing reading skills. So the better that one can read and the higher level that one can read, I think that the better one would actually do in life.
Well, for sure, because you can tackle more, right? And there again, the confidence comes in, right? If you have someone who is afraid that they won't be able to understand it, or has a certainty, their confidence has dropped to the level where they have a certainty, doesn't mean it's true, but they feel they can't read, then they know they can't learn. And so instead of reaching for things, instead of being adventurous about learning new things, they're like, no, I'm good.
They'll hold back. Right.
I'm good. They just don't want to do it. And then there are all sorts of labels that go on to that. Oh, they're introverted. Oh, they're this. Oh, they're that. Well, maybe you just should check. Maybe they just don't have the confidence to reach for that thing. And that's what needs to be handled. And very often it is the reading.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. You have to have the reading skill and ability, and especially when they get into, like you said, word problems. So
yeah, word problems are a bear. Let me tell you something. I mean, word problems sometimes, even for us as teachers, are like,
what did they ask?
What in the world are they asking? No joke. I've had 4th and 5th grade math problems that I've had to ask the student, okay, give me a minute. And I have to, they can be really complicated.
Yeah.
Even for a reader. So can you imagine if you can't read, or you
Yeah.
don't know the words, and then you're supposed to decode what in the world is going, like, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Even if they know the math, they can't do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, at Success Tutoring Online, we regularly get asked questions by parents that have little ones just starting school and that are learning to read. I'd like to address some of those questions. One of those questions is, why does my child not yet read, and what can I do to help encourage them to read? What would you say to the parents asking this?
The first piece of advice that I would give to parents in today's, this might not have been so 2 years ago or 5 years ago, but in today's world, the way that education is structured, is stop stressing. Stop stressing about it. there's so much attention, so much emphasis being put on benchmarks, and your child should be able to know these words and say this and do that at this exact age and that exact age. Now, there are purposes obviously for benchmarks, and there's nothing wrong with having benchmarks. There's not. But senior to any benchmark is, your child, and children are different, right?
Right.
And
Right.
I think that a lot of parents are just getting too stressed because of course they don't want their kid to be behind, right? You want the best for your child. You want to do everything that you can to give them the best shot. You want them to do well. You want them to be happy. You have all these things. And so I think that benchmarks have put a little too much stress on parents instead of just do what works with your child. You want to get your child to read well, just read. Read to them, read with them, read yourself, set an example,
Right.
right? You should be reading in front of them, You really should. There's a really cute little comic strip thing that I like, that you see two sets of a mom and I think it's a mom and a daughter are on a park bench next to each other. And one of the moms is reading and her daughter is reading, the child is reading. And then the other one, the mom is looking at her and saying, "How do you get your child to read?" And she's on her phone and the kid
Right.
is on her phone. Kids mimic.
Right. Exactly.
Kids mimic. They mimic everything. And even if they don't immediately mimic it, they see it, they register it, and it files itself away. So if they see you reading, and if you were reading to them, well, then it becomes a cool thing to do.
Exactly.
It becomes a cool thing to do. So that the easiest thing to help your kids in terms of reading is just read a lot.
Now, I always tell parents also that what they should do is don't worry about the content or anything. Like when they're babies, they don't recognize the words yet. They don't. Little kids, little babies, they don't recognize the words. They don't know all the terminology. They don't know what's being said. But for them, it's just a bonding time with mom, or bonding time with dad or grandma or whoever. It's actual time that they're spending one-on-one with this child, and they're sitting there and they're looking at a book, and they're listening to mom read, or and mom's reading the story. They don't understand the words, they don't know what's going on, but they cherish that time, and then they start to associate that time with reading, with books, with a time that it's a pleasure. It's a time of pleasure. It's a time of fun, and something that they actually look forward to because they enjoy it.
Oh, absolutely. I'll tell you, with my granddaughter, if she asks you to read her a book, it's the biggest compliment you can get, because for her, she's grown up. My daughter and son-in-law are both big readers. They love to read. They have books everywhere. She comes to our house. We have books everywhere. She's always been read to since she was teeny. I have one of my favorite pictures is on my bookcase over here. It's her reading, her dad reading to her when she was about 4 months old. And she has a hold of the book with her little hand, like, and she's so interested. Yeah, you're so right. They connect it with time with mom, time with dad, time with grandma, time with grandpa, whatever.
Exactly.
And it is a pleasure moment for them, right?
Right.
And that's what reading should be anyway. Reading should be fun. It should be pleasurable. It shouldn't be stressful. And if you connect it in that way, where it's a calm space, it's just a cool thing that you do, they get it.
Yeah.
They get it and they pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if they're not read to, if all they have is basically, if they're just handed a phone or video, and nobody reads in the house, and then they're going to be starting kindergarten in 2 months. Oh, we should probably start getting them learning to read. And by that time, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be tough.
It's going to be really difficult. Plus, you're never going to be able to give them what they need in that amount of time.
Right.
You're just not, right? You're not going to be able to do it. And then that's where the stress starts to come in, because then they get into school and it's like, oh, they're behind. Which, I mean, don't even get me started on that. They're going to kindergarten. How are you behind?
I know.
Kindergarten.
I'm amazed at some of the things that they're asking kindergartners to do. It's amazing.
But this is what I meant a while ago when I said in the system as it is today. Kindergarten, when I was in school, in college, studying education, kindergarten was colors, shapes, learn not to hit other kids. I mean, really. Learn that there are boundaries.
Right.
Learn to draw a circle, a line. These were the things, but that's not how it is anymore. So the earlier that you can start on reading, the better. Now, I will say this as well, as I've done a lot of research on this. I have my own experience with it, with my own children, with hundreds, probably thousands of other people's children. So I know it to be true because I've seen it with my own eyes, that the more, it's like you said before, the more reading you do when they're young, the better they're going to do later. And there are a lot of science papers, a lot of research papers, scientific studies that have been done on that.
Yeah.
And proven to be true. One of the more recent ones was done in 2019 by, I think it was Ohio State University. It was published in one of the pediatric research logs, right? That said, a child who's read 5 books a day when they're young, we're talking babies, toddlers, right? 5 a day. Now, realize that, that could make somebody freak out. But when we say 5 books a day, we're talking, it's a board book. It's not very long.
4 or 5 pages each book. Yeah, exactly.
We're not talking a major book here, right? 5 books a day, their vocabulary is 1.4 million words higher than a child who's not read to. Wow. 1 book a day is 290,000 words, right? More than a child who's never read to. I questioned that. I was like, well, okay, but what if the parents are just, conversation and this and that? The point made there was that there are things in conversation. Yes, of course, you can have intelligent conversations with your kids, answer questions and so on. But what books do, the conversation will not do, is subjects come up in books that will not come up in a conversation with a 3 or 4-year-old. Not normally, right?
Yeah.
You're probably not going to randomly start talking about penguins.
Right.
Or the North Pole, or tons of other things. Example, my granddaughter, we opened a book the other day and it was a little so-and-so goes to the doctor book, right? And she opened it up and she said, oh, that's an otoscope. She's 20 months old.
An otoscope?
It's an otoscope. And I was like, I looked at my daughter. I'm like, what? How does she know that's an otoscope? And she said, well, we told her. She knows it's an otoscope and that the doctor uses it, when he gives you a checkup. And she gave me a lesson, a 20-month-old on an otoscope. I didn't know that's what that thing was called. Right? That's just not something that's going to come up in conversation, right?
Yeah.
But it opened up this entire additional conversation with her about ears and the throat and eyes and how things work. And so at that point, when I started reading into the study a little more, I went, wow, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense because, from tutoring yourself and working with kids, and I certainly know as a teacher, you learn a lot when you read with kids and teach kids stuff. My point being, those things aren't going to come up if you're not reading.
That's true.
You're not. And so you're broadening the awareness and you're broadening the subject matter that a child is exposed to, which, I mean, yes, it increases their vocabulary and their knowledge, but it also increases, again, their confidence and their reach into the world and their interest in learning, because they know they can learn anything. You see, they know they can learn anything because
Yeah.
they're learning all the time.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. Another question we get asked regularly is, my child reads smoothly and easily and even reads at above grade level, but he seems to have trouble with comprehension. His teacher doesn't seem to be concerned about it, but I think it's important. What should I do to help improve my child's reading comprehension?
There's a couple points here. Number one, start by asking them if they even know what that means. Now, I know that seems obvious, but maybe once, but I really don't remember a single student at any age, right? Their mom just talked to them talked to me in front of them about reading comprehension. Their teachers say reading comprehension. Their workbooks say reading comprehension. You need to handle your reading comprehension, right?
And they don't even know what that means.
They don't know. They don't know.
Yeah.
And they will give me, I wish that I'd written them down so that I could give you some of the answers that I get. But I ask every single student who comes to me for reading comprehension, what does that mean? What does comprehension mean? And they look at me like, what? And I'm like, well, what does it mean? They're like, I don't know.
I wonder if some of the parents actually know.
They might not. They literally don't know.
Yeah.
And so they think it's all sorts of crazy things. Well, it means something to do with writing, or it means, I mean, it's just wild, the answers that I get, right? So the first thing is, like, make sure they understand what it is you're asking of them, right? What is it that you mean by that? And what are they being asked to do? Because otherwise you're just talking over a great big confusion, right? The other thing you have to realize, to the point of the teacher doesn't seem to be worried about it. There's an emphasis right now in school, and the emphasis reading wise is words per minute and fluency. Fluency in this case meaning just read it smoothly. In other words, parrot out the words without making a mistake and do it quickly. And
smoothly and quickly.
Smoothly and quickly,
Yeah.
right? And if they can do that, they get a pass on reading, right? Now, they have no idea in a lot of cases what they just read, right? And what that encourages students to do, and we see it all the time, is they just rotely memorize words. They look at a word and they go, oh, that word is, inquire. And they file it away in there for the next time it might come up. They have no idea what it means. They have no idea really how to decode the word on their own, right? They just know that's what they were told it is, and they memorize it. And so you have this great big huge memory bank here that is almost thinking for them. I mean, that's not really what's happening, but you get my point. It's like there's this mechanical thing that goes on, right? And then they don't like reading because they're reading things over and over and over again this way, being told they're a great reader, but then when they sit down to read an actual story, they can't remember what they read, or they don't understand it, or they think it's all dumb because they don't understand it, or whatever. So you have to know that is the thing right now, right? That is the thing. And there are some teachers who really try to teach the reading comprehension, but again, teachers have a very limited amount of time to get X amount of things done, and they can't always cover that, right?
And especially, like you said, with 35, 40 students in the class, they can't.
No, they can't. Now, what the biggest way, well, there's a couple things, but one of the most important and key reasons that they don't understand is they don't know the vocabulary. They don't know the words.
Right.
right? They're being taught to read over what things they don't understand, and in many cases are not allowed due to time, or this is a test or whatever. They're not allowed to, you know, grab a dictionary or Google a definition. Uh, I mean, I have lots of students who are like, "What's a dictionary?"
Yeah, I know. I know.
No joke.
I've seen that with high school students.
No, no joke, right? I had to explain, and she's going into 8th grade. I'm like, "Well, w but if you didn't understand, the teacher asked you, 'Did you understand?' And you didn't raise your hand." She's like, "Well, none of us understood it." "And none of you raised your hand?" "No." "Oh." She was like, "No way." Right? They don't wanna be embarrassed, they don't wanna get in trouble. I'm like, "Well, what about a dictionary or something? You know, could you look it up?" "What's a dictionary?" I explained what a dictionary is. I showed her my dictionary. She goes, "Oh, yeah, we have one of those over there on the shelf. No one's ever touched it." So that's one of the main things. So you can start if you're reading with your kids on comprehension, watch for that. Watch for words that they don't know. You know, if they're stumbling, if they're confused, ask. You know, is there a word here that is confusing to you? "Oh, well, yeah, I don't know what that means." "Oh, okay, good. Well, let's look it up." Right? So that's one thing that's really, really key. And then the other thing that I always do when I'm reading with anyone, no matter their age, I don't care if they're 5 or if they're 19, is depending on the book, depending on the student, I always stop after a certain increment and I ask, "So what's going on there?
What was that about? Yeah.
What was that about?" You know? Now, a lot of times kids will have a bit of a button, a bit of a spot on being asked questions because they've often been asked those questions in a bit of a negative way. So you have to kind of watch it. Don't do that. Be interested yourself, right?
Right.
I approach it from like, wait a minute, what? Did you get that? Did you just get what happened there? And if they understand it, they'll go, "Oh, yeah, blah, 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 blah." And I'm like, okay, good, they got it. And then we move on. Or they'll go, no. They'll look at me like, why are you making such a big deal out of it? What are you talking about? And I'll know, oh, whoops, oops, we need to go back, right? So you can do that, right? And you can tell them that in the beginning. We're going to stop after every page and discuss, right? Not correct, not you don't remember? No, we're going to discuss it,
Right.
right? And then really discuss it. Like really, did they get it or did they not get it? If they got it, good, move on. If they didn't, sort it out,
Right. Right.
right? And then they learn to read for understanding on their own. I mean, those are the simplest things I can say to sort that out.
Well, I'm amazed at some of the words that are used in uh, younger kids' homework.
Yeah,
Unbelievable.
it's ridiculous.
I was helping a student a while ago, third grade. Third grade. Okay. And really, all it was they were asking a student to really, it was a subtraction problem. Okay. So Joe started off with this many items, and then this many were gone. How many does he have left? That was really the problem. However, the way it was worded was Joe worked at the what was it, a bowling place. Okay. It was his malodorous job to collect the shoes.
Yeah,
A third grader.
I know. Yeah, guess what? A lot of the kindergarten, first, second grade math books have the word algebra in them, right? There's a philosophy, and not all schools use it, but there is a philosophy rolling around these days that if you just expose kids to words above their level, they will eventually, I don't know, like by osmosis or some crazy thing, they'll just start understanding. But It doesn't work like that. It's bananas. It
Right.
doesn't
Right.
it doesn't work, but you're right, which is another reason that the phonics, the ability to understand how the language works, how letters work to make sounds, how they create words, what your options are, because in English, frankly, there can be a lot of options for one sound.
Right.
This is why these concepts and reading are so important, because they will be faced with that stuff and they're going to need to be able to work their way through it.
Exactly. Okay, well, here's the next question we get asked regularly. My child seems to be making good progress on her reading, but every time I try to read with her, she cries, especially if I correct her on something. Now, I do that because I want her to keep getting better and better at reading, and I want her to do it correctly. I tell her that it is okay to be wrong, but then she cries even more. What should I do?
Okay, here's a little correction on the parent there. To be blunt. Okay, so I think that people need to step back a little bit and take a look. So no one likes to be corrected. Really. It's like, it's just not something that is enjoyable for any human being,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
They also don't like being told they're wrong,
right.
right? I mean, we just don't like it's just a thing, okay? No one enjoys being wrong. No one really goes looking to be corrected, you know? It's a tough thing to have, right? So, on the other side of that is, of course, parents want their kids to do well, right?
Yeah,
And of course, when you see them do something that isn't correct, or you see them not doing something well, you feel compelled to do something, and that's correct. That there's nothing wrong with that, right?
right, right.
But there's a way to do it, and I learned this through experience as a teacher. Like, as a teacher, I wiped the word wrong from my vocabulary. I don't ever use the word wrong with a child, ever. I also threw away all my red pens, because what happens, yeah, see, you laugh because you know exactly what that means, right?
Yeah,
We've
exactly.
all gone through you turn in a paper, you think you did well, you think you wrote a good story, or you think you did well on a math test or whatever, you get it back and it's just marked all up with red ink and right? Okay, well, the minute as a parent that you're like, correct, 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 wrong, 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 you can tell them it's okay to be wrong all you want. But what you've just turned yourself into is a big red pen,
A
right?
correction machine.
You're a correction machine, right? And then, of course, they're not going to want to read with you.
It's not
It's
fun.
it's not fun.
Right.
It's not fun. Number one, when they're very young, don't correct them at all. Just don't. Why? Right? There's no need. All you want as a product when they're young, and I'm talking like 2, 3, 4, and even into kindergarten, the only product that you really, in my opinion, and the only thing I ever care about is, do they like to read?
Right.
I don't think, my daughter is really, really good at this, actually, with her, my granddaughter has picked up a lot in terms of reading and what words mean. And, she's really, really smart, but colors are a little harder for her, right? So she will say something like, "Oh, a blue flower." And my daughter never tells her, "No, that's not a blue flower." She's like, "It's a beautiful flower, but it's red." And then River will go, "Oh, it's a red flower," right? There's no correction in that, right? It's just teaching,
Right.
right? So that kind of thing is fine, but don't stress out when they're little about them getting everything right, or reading a word properly, or getting the letter right, or getting the color right. Just read with them, play with them, teach them things. Don't worry about it, right? And when they get a little bit older, get their agreement. Get their agreement to let you help them, not correct them. right? So, or if they don't want to be corrected, then don't, right? If you ask them, I do this with kids sometimes. Is it okay when you're reading, if you make a mistake, can I stop you and tell you that you made a mistake? And they'll go, no. Okay. Well, I asked. And they said no. So I'm just like, okay, fine. And then I keep notes. Oh, they read through periods, right? Clearly they don't understand the purpose of a period
Right.
or whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Or they always get the word together wrong, right? Just note it or file it away. And then in some completely unrelated way, bring it up later.
Yeah.
Hey, have you ever heard about a period when you're reading? No. Let me show you, right? Go get a book. Let me show you. But do it as something that's new and unique and not a correction. You see? There are
Mm.
lots of ways to teach things. Correcting or you're wrong is definitely not the way to go.
Right.
It requires repetition. It requires a tremendous amount of patience,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it just requires easing up. Don't stress out and just let them have fun with it.
And that's key. Let them have fun.
Let them have fun. I get a lot of older students that they hate reading.
Right.
They hate reading and they will never, they will never pick up a book. And I use the same philosophy, the same system, the same whatever you want to call it with the older ones as well.
Yeah.
Right. And one thing you can do too that I forgot to say when you're working on reading comprehension or trying to get an older one to read with them. And by read with them and read to them, you would be surprised how much even older kids enjoy being read to.
Yeah.
Stop trying to make them read to you. You read to them, right? Read to them with all the, excitement, and you're going to find it's actually pretty fun. You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
Yeah.
I think that for me, I really enjoy doing that. And then once they get interested and they're like, oh, this story's kind of good, right? I can watch it when I'm working with the student. There's a little bit of a light that starts to come on,
Yeah.
right? They start out with and then there's like a little bit of interest and a little bit of light, and then they'll make a comment like, oh, that's cool. Or, well, could you read a little more? Right?
Yeah.
Could we read more?
Yeah.
And then I know I got them.
Yeah.
And then you can turn it into, okay, so now I'm going to read a page, you're going to read a page. I'm going to read a page, you're going to read a page, right? And you'll see that if you do that and you yourself are fully engaged and interested with that child and in that book, it's contagious.
Right.
It might
Yeah.
take a while. It takes patience,
Yeah.
but they just don't, they've never done it and they've never ever had it be an enjoyable thing. So you need to turn it into that for them.
Right. We get asked this too. My son seems to read okay with small words, but seems to have trouble with big words. What should I do to help him?
Well, I mean, technically, the first thing I would recommend, really, if he really does fine with small words and he just doesn't with big, I would have him checked for his phonics. That's honestly the first thing I would do, right? Someone who knows what they're doing, right? Because what that tells me is he probably just does not know how to break the word apart. That's a phonics issue, right? Because you can, even if I don't know a word, I could pick up any crazy book on a subject I don't know anything about. And I might not know the word, but I know my phonics well enough that I know my options, right? And I can usually use those options to figure out, oh yeah, that's right. That's what that word is, right? So
Exactly.
that's the first thing that I would tell them to do, because if they can't decode the letters, they can't decode the sounds, they don't know how to put them together, along with things like syllables, how to use syllables to sound out a word, then they're going to have trouble with bigger words because they just don't know what to do with them,
Right.
right? So that would be my first suggestion, honestly, is get them checked on their phonics, and if they need be, have them instructed on phonics. It's not complicated, right? That can be done very easily. The other thing I would say is what I said earlier, check the meanings.
Right.
Check the meanings on the words, right? And even before that, make sure they're not reading above their grade level. But that's happening a lot. And so you need to know that, you've got to check that. You've got to see if they understand. If you can, I mean, obviously, if it's in school and it's a textbook or something, there's not a lot as a parent you can do about that. If it's reading books, though, ramp it down a little bit, right? Just ease it up. It's another reason for kids hating to read is that they're being forced into reading above their level and they just can't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just
Exactly.
can't do it, right? So those are the main three things: the phonics, the vocabulary, and just make sure it's the right level book.
Very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the next question. My daughter prefers to play on her iPad as opposed to reading. How can I get her to be more interested in reading?
So my first piece of advice is do not start that in the first place. If you have a young child and you have not exposed them to iPads, phones, televisions, YouTube, etc., just don't. And I know that's a rather attackable position because a lot of people are like, well, but I work and I'm busy and and it's the only thing that I know, right? I know. But as difficult as that is, I have found in many, many cases that's a solvable problem, or at least put very strict limits on it, right? This is why. Every child I have ever worked with, and I mean every single one, and this I'm telling you from experience, every single one that is heavily, and again, every child is different. Some kids, it doesn't affect them that much, right? Or they're just not that interested in electronics or video games or whatever, right? They just aren't. Again, like I said, I had 4 kids. I had one who I had to actually take the stuff away and lock it up because he was a monster when he was on video games. He completely changed. His entire personality changed, right? Some kids are like that. My other son, I could say, turn it off, and he'd go, okay. And he'd turn it off and walk away from it. So everyone's different. I'm not saying that all kids are like this, but what I am saying is that every child that has come to me who is a heavy electronic consumer, right? Whether that be iPad, YouTube, a lot of television, phones, whatever, video games, they have difficulty with creativity and imagination, right? They don't want to read. They think it's work, right? They don't want to write. They can't think of anything to write, right? Now, my theory on that, and what I have seen to be true when I have worked with parents to get kids off of that, is they are accustomed to from a very young age. And you've got to realize when you've got little ones, you're wiring them for life here on a lot of things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You really are. I mean, when you're teaching someone colors, this is a thing, right? And it's going to stick with them. Well, this is true of negative things as well as positive things, right? So when they are in front of a screen of whatever kind, all of the creating is being done for them.
Exactly. They're just receiving.
They're receiving information. They're receiving color. They're receiving the story. They're being told, this is what this looks like. This is what this sounds like, right? And it takes zero effort to do that, right? And yes, it can be entertaining. And yes, there's some good programs out there. I'm not saying it's all bad. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that the heavy use of it, the constant bombardment in of the creativity and the lack of their having to create for themselves is detrimental in the long run, right?
Right.
And of course, they don't want to read because it takes some work, right? Writing takes some work, right?
Oh yeah.
I'll use an example, a book, really great book. I use this book a lot with younger kids to get them to like reading, and it's Charlotte's Web. It's a classic. It's been around forever, right? That is a rich story and a story that every kid should read, right? But I believe it's a story that every child should read with a parent, right? Because it's a little tough. It's got some vocabulary and stuff in it, but that the way that story is written creates a world. It creates a world that is completely left to the imagination of the reader to a large degree. You know, you have a relationship between a little girl and a pig and a spider and the geese and an old snarky rat, and you know, this whole world of this barn and the relationship between the adults and the kids, and it just has a lot of really great content, right? So yeah, you could sit them in front of the TV and they could watch Charlotte's Web. I've never watched the movie, but I assume it's a pretty good movie, right? It's probably very cute. But the minute you do that, all of that they could have created in their mind, in their imagination, is now fed to them. This is
Right.
what the pig looks like. This is what the geese sounds like. This is the color of the, you know, whatever. It's not the same thing, you
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
This is part of why reading, also readers are good writers. Reading also is extremely good for writing because it requires imagination. It
Right.
builds those pathways that allow a child to create a world, right?
Right.
I mean, I don't know. I'm sure when you were young, you had the same thing, right? We're about the same age. Where if I told my mom I was bored, yeah, okay, so she was like, go outside. You know, I mean,
Exactly.
really, her reaction, and she wasn't mean about it.
Right.
She really
Right.
wasn't. She wasn't trying to be mean or dismissive at all. But she was sort of like, why are you telling me that?
Go do
Go,
something about it.
go do something, right?
Yeah.
Like, go
Yeah.
create something. You have
Yeah.
friends, you have a yard, you have a bike, you know, you have paints, you have crayons, you have books. Like, okay, you're bored. So go handle it. And I was like, okay, you know, and I would go read a story or I'd draw or I'd get a friend to, you know, ride bikes. This is unfortunately kind of gone the way of the dodo to a large degree. You know, I'm bored. Oh, here's my iPad,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Or the parent needs time. Here's my iPad. It's a very tough, because also part of what's different in this day and age is that parents have to work a lot more.
Yeah.
You know, they just do.
Yeah.
They're working longer hours. Both parents are generally working because we have
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
You know, we have to. I mean, I worked when my kids were growing up. I didn't want to, but I did,
Yeah.
right? It's just a necessity. But so it's a bit of a catch-22, I guess would be the word for it. But it's something that really needs to be figured out so that that child is taken, or at least to a degree weaned off of that iPad. Because the minute that you let him connect up and that is coming at him, he becomes less willing to put out his own effort, his own creativity, his own imagination. Wean them off, you know, play games, do some trade-off, and don't make it you have to go read for an hour in order to have, you know what I mean? That's not going to work. But something more like, hey, we're going to read a story. I found a cool book, or let's go to the library. You choose a book you want to read. Or if you don't want to start out with reading, if that's too much, if you have a real true reading hater on your hands, then start by going for a walk and looking at things. You need to do things to extrovert that child's attention because they are used to it all coming this way, right?
Right.
So it's work, but you have to get that thought process going the other way.
I was going to say that this reminds me of the game that I know some teachers play, parents play, which is actually very good, where you co-create a story.
Yes.
So you're out on your walk, like you said, you're going out on a walk, and you start a story. Well, once upon a time, there was this little girl at a campfire, and she was really tired. She didn't want to go, but she went anyway with her family. Okay, now your turn.
No, that's so valid. That's a great idea. And it's a really great way to get kids to write too. I do that with kids who have trouble writing is we trade off. I write a sentence, they write a sentence, I write a sentence, and we create some crazy story about wizards or whatever. It's a great idea. My husband used to do that with one of my kids that when he would be like, okay, let's go for a walk. And that's exactly what he would do. He would take him for a walk and he'd look, oh my gosh, look at that. What do you think? Hey, what if this, and they would get in. And by the time he came home from that walk, that kid was out there. He was happy. He was telling me stories about tigers and fleas and, all kinds of crazy stuff, but he was happy as could be. It's a great suggestion. The whole point being get the attention going the other direction, get the communication going the other direction. Communication is one of the skills you get from reading. And when you're only receiving, you're not communicating, right?
Yeah.
Writing is communication. Well, they're not writing because they're used to everything being fed to them, right? So you have to reverse that flow. You have to reverse that energy, right? And instead of everything coming in, you've got to get them pushing their own energy and imagination out. And you'll see the tantrums, which almost always accompany these things, will start to go away. The communication will go back in, I just think it's gotten to be too much. I don't think that it's bad. And of course, kids need to know how to use computers and they need to know how to use phones. And there's nothing wrong with a kid playing some video games. I don't have an issue with all of that. I'm saying don't let it be too much. Don't let it get to the point where your kid won't do anything else.
Okay, well, Susan, we've answered a number of parent questions with regard to reading. Is there anything else that you'd like to say to parents about how to help their children that are learning to read or that want to improve their reading skill?
I think I pretty much said it. I really want people to just have fun with it. Just make sure that your kid is winning, make sure that they're winning, make sure that they're enjoying life, enjoying reading, that when you're teaching them something, it's because they want to learn it. Right. Keep it light, keep it fun.
I'll tell you, I think this has been great. And I think parents are really going to appreciate all of these suggestions and things that you've covered. I want to thank you very much for joining us. And we will talk to you later.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, very good. I want to thank all of our listeners and all of those watching on YouTube for joining us today. I hope that you have found today's show to be valuable and informative. And if you like today's show and you haven't already, please subscribe so as not to miss any of our upcoming future interviews. For now, this is Armando Salcido signing off, and I hope to see you again next week. As mentioned at the beginning of the show, Learning with Success is sponsored by Success Tutoring Online. Our administrative offices are located in Burbank, California, but we provide tutoring or academic advancement to students throughout the United States.